If I wanted to make $10 million in the next 18 months from scratch, this is the product that I would sell. I've built 5 businesses with over $10 million in sales each, and there's one thing that I've learned. The product is absolutely critical. If you have the wrong product, you can work hard, you can hustle, you can do all the right strategies, but it's going to be incredibly difficult to scale your business. If you have the right product, life is so much easier. Growth almost happens automatically. All your traffic sources work better. You're more profitable. Life is so much easier and customers are happier. So choosing the right product is absolutely critical. I've spent the last 17 years building my own businesses, choosing my own products, making a ton of mistakes, especially on the product side, but everywhere else in business. And then I've also spent the last 12 years teaching people how to build e-commerce businesses and people that have selected tens of thousands of products now. So I'm going to break down the exact 7-step process that I would use to choose a product right now if I wanted to build a $10 million business in just the next 18 months. Plus, I'm even going to give you a few product ideas that I'm looking at right now. The first thing to understand before we get into the 7 steps is that your goal determines the product. If you're just getting started in business, you can follow all these same exact steps that I'm about to give you and build a $1 million business. And so you may want to select a $1 million product because life is probably going to be a little bit easier, though not as much as you would think. But the mistake that I see a lot of people make, especially people that have already built a business, is they keep adding incremental products. And there's been something that I've been thinking about. It's that incremental products produce incremental results. So if you only want incremental results in your business and life, by all means, choose an incremental product. In our business selling organic coffee, we will launch intentionally some incremental products, a new flavor or something like that. We don't expect to reinvent the business or add a massive amount of revenue, but it's nice incremental steady growth. But we also have to be intentional that if we want to double or triple our business, we have to add a product that can double or triple our business. So we're no longer going after incremental products. I like to call these products that can make big jumps in the business keystone products. And so these become the focal point of your entire business. At one point, I read like 25 years of Monster Beverage Corporation's annual reports because it's all public. They actually used to be a juice company. But they found out at some point around the 2000 that this energy drink market was exploding. And so they launched a few test products, and that ended up becoming their entire business. That became their keystone product was energy drinks. And that's what we're hoping exactly the same thing for you. Back in the day when Apple first launched the iPhone, it was a tiny percentage of sales. Now it's over 50% of their sales. And you'll never find that out if you keep going after incremental products. And so in our coffee business, we're launching some products now that not really relevant to the exact same customer we have. They're both coffee products, but they're slightly different. But we think this new product could double our business while we're at the same time launching incremental products. So bringing this back to the concept of your goal determines your product. If you want to build a $10 million business, the easiest, fastest way to get there is to sell a $10 million product. It's so much easier to sell one product that does $10 million than 10 products that do $1 million each. So if you want to build a $10 million business, or if you want to add $10 million to your existing business, quit looking only at incremental products. Start looking at products that could double the size of your entire business or add another $10 million in revenue. Now, before we go any further, you might be wondering, like, why $10 million? Why have I picked that number specifically? First off, I've noticed that a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck at the low 7 figures, $1 to $5 million, and they can't get out. And a big part of it is they keep going after incremental products. I've also noticed, based on my own personal experience, that once you get to $10 million in revenue, there's nothing magical, it's somewhat arbitrary, but every time I've done it, it feels like life gets so much easier. The business is more predictable. The team is more stable. Sales are easier to count on. You've got multiple channels. You've got diversification in your marketing set. And so all of that ends up creating a much more stable, more fun business to run. And also there's just a raw numbers aspect to this, because if you're doing $10 million in revenue and say your profit is on the low end, you're doing $1 million a year. Well, if you want to go out there and you want to replace yourself in the business and say you want to hire 1 or 2 6-figure executives, which total compensation could be $250,000 each, say you hire 2 of those, that's $500,000 out the door. But that means you still want to pay yourself because you're no longer doing the role. So you just elevated yourself to an owner, or you ever want to sell the business, it's the same situation without having to run it. Then you still want extra cash. You've got a $500,000 buffer there that you can use to pay yourself, you can use to reinvest in the business. And so there is a logical reason to this $10 million mark where things become more consistent, but you also have the cash and the money to be able to pay for very high quality people. You are able to build your cash base for if opportunities come along or bad things happen, and you have the money to pay yourself without having to be involved in everything in day-to-day operations. Now, how do you actually get to $10 million? Like, what does this mean? What are we trying to back into from the product that we select? So if you want to do $10 million, say you want to build a business worth $10 million, if it's a fast growing business with the majority of its sales on a platform you control, such as Shopify or your own website or direct to consumer, as opposed to on a platform like Amazon or retail, then if it's a fast growing business in a good market where you own most of the sales, a multiple, it's not crazy to get 8 times your bottom line profit. Your owner earnings is how it's called, but that's not a crazy amount. You could even get higher, but let's say 8 times. And so if you take the $10 million valuation, divide it by 8, that's $1.25 million per year in profit. And just to make the math easy, let's assume that's 1.2 million. So that's about $100,000 a month in profit you need to be doing. And if you're at the low end of the profit scale and you're doing 10% in bottom line profit and you want to make $100,000 a month, that means you need to be doing about $1 million a month in sales. And so that's what we're kind of backing into here. If you want to build a $10 million business, sell a product that can do at least $1 million a month in sales. That's the first criteria you're looking for. And so this brings us into step number 1, which is to choose a big market. I am a fan of going after big markets as opposed to tiny little niche markets. I used to sell very specific supplements. I sold 11,000 of them when I first built my business, and it was a nightmare to manage all that stuff. It's much easier to sell one product that does all the sales that you need. Some of the best businesses today, that's exactly what they do. Think of Coca-Cola. They kind of set the stage for everybody. They sell primarily one product, or at least did for a long time, and then they started buying other brands and developing brands, but they're still known for Coca-Cola. Now think about Red Bull. They got to $1 billion valuation with an 8.4 ounce single can. And then there's more modern examples like Grüns, the vitamin gummy brand that just sold for over $1 billion. Then there's AG1 or Athletic Greens, which I believe is valued at something like $2 billion. And they all just sell basically one product. So it's a great business to be in. But the only way you're going to get to $10 million selling just one product is if that market can actually support that. So look for big markets. One way to find this out is you're just looking around, seeing the stuff sold all over the place and advertised all over the place. That stuff is going into your brain, so that's a good source of data. But if you want to be more specific, you can go to Amazon and look at the top 100 products, and then you can, any of those in the top 100 can probably support $10 million per year in sales. You can also use a tool like Jungle Scout's free sales estimator tool, where you take the product that you find on Amazon, plug it into their tool, and they'll tell you how much sales it produces. And that's a good way to know if it can support $1 million a month or $10 million a year plus in sales. Then step number 2 is within a big market, you really want one of two kind of products. You either want a consumable or subscription product, something that gets used up, like we sell coffee, other people sell vitamins and supplements. All that stuff is good. So you want a consumable product because that gives you repeat revenue. It also, what's most important, gives you a high customer value because they come back and buy again and again, either on subscription or just because the thing runs out. So you either want a subscription or consumable product, or you want a high margin one-time purchase product. There's a brand out there that I've read about or heard about on a podcast. I actually read the podcast transcripts instead of listening to them in some cases, but they own a brand called Turtlebox. This brand does millions and millions of dollars of sales a year. They sell speakers that, from what I've seen, are around $250. And it's for a speaker that in a lot of cases, you could probably buy a similar one for like $50. Now, their product quality, I'm sure, is way better. I don't know that much about them. But they are in the second category of high margin one-time purchase product. Because sure, maybe you want multiple speakers, but most people are only going to buy one speaker. And so that means they have to get all of their customer value out of that person on that first purchase. This is also a totally fine model. People love subscription. They love consumable because of the predictable nature. But if you could get all of that money upfront in one purchase, what's the difference? To me, there's none. You get all that cash on day one rather than hoping it comes later. So I don't think either one of these models is necessarily better or worse, but those are the two types of products you're looking for. Subscription/consumable or high margin one-time purchase product. Now, to give you an example of a few product ideas that I feel like are interesting in this space, number one, healthy snacks. There are so many healthy candy company, healthy snack brands. Lesser Evil, the popcorn brand, sold for, I believe it was $750 million. Siete sold chips, sold for over $1 billion. So these are huge numbers, but just think about building a smaller brand, $10 million, selling a healthy snack product. That's a great option. It plays into the consumable and subscription nature, so that's a good option. Number two, single SKU apparel. So this is an interesting space because it's a little bit in between of both. And so you think about how the company True Classic Tees started. They just sold t-shirts. Now they sell all kinds of stuff. But if you sell a single SKU apparel product, you are the best beanie company. You are the best hat company. You are the best t-shirt or hoodie company, kind of like Comfort. They started with hoodies and then they kind of blew up from there. Now they do like $600 million a year. And so that is a good position because the problem with apparel is when you have too many different SKUs, or you've got t-shirts, and you've got long sleeve t-shirts, you've got short sleeve t-shirts, you've got pants, you've got all kinds of different things. The number of products you have to store and your inventory costs just explode. It's not going to be perfect with most products, even with a single SKU. And I say single SKU, I'm really meaning a single product because you may have different variation sizes. So if you want to sell just a t-shirt, you may have 7 different t-shirt sizes. And so that's why I recommend just selling one of those kind of products. But that to me is still great because I don't know about you, but I don't know how often that you've shopped around looking for the best of a single product. I had to have bought, 20 hats. I got this giant head over here, so I'm always trying to find a good fitting hat. I bought like 20 hats. I didn't like all of them. I even bought a $170 hat from one company that sold other stuff, and it's still a struggle. And so if you can own a single apparel item, that's a great business because it is consumable because they get old, they wear out, people need to buy new ones, and it's also can be high margin if you're more on the premium side. Lastly, I would consider selling anti-plastic cookware. Seems very specific, but this whole anti-plastic movement has been picking up steam. There's documentaries on it and all kinds of stuff. Tons of different opportunities from coffee makers and literally everything your food touches and beverages touch. Another great space where this is going to be more on the end if you sell at a premium price of a high margin one-time purchase product. These are all good options to look at. Step number 3 is you want to offer something unique. I call this the coffee shop test. So imagine you're in a coffee shop sitting in front of your ideal customer for the new product you want to sell. You need an answer for why should this person buy your product, assuming they're 100% aware of all the other related products in that market. You need an answer for that. Why should they buy your product? This is a big mistake people make is they come out with a product and it's just the same as everyone else's and there's no real reason why somebody should buy theirs. They just hope people do because you're there. That makes life very hard. And so you need something unique when you're entering this market selling a subscription product or a high margin one-time purchase product. You need an answer. And somebody that I believe has put this the best from a copywriting standpoint, it's a guy named Evaldo Albuquerque. He wrote a book called The 16-Word Sales Letter. It's a tiny little book. I've got it on Kindle. I've got it printed. If you ever want copywriting stuff, it's a great resource. His number one question in there in the copy that you have to answer if you want to write good copy is, how is this different from everything else that I've seen? You need to be able to answer that. And so one way to figure that out is to read a ton of reviews. That's the good thing about selling stuff online today. It's not a black box. You don't have to go survey customers or any of that sort of stuff. You can just sit there and just pound through Amazon and Shopify reviews for a few hours, and you'll know a ton about what people like and don't like about the existing options. And you can come up with a better solution with something that matters to people so that you can take a piece of that market, carve it out initially, and then scale from there. So big market, niche appeal at first, and then grow from there. This is exactly what we've done in the coffee business. Big market coffee, we started with a very small appeal, like low acid coffee, and then now we're broadening it because our coffee is also, we believe, one of the healthiest coffees. So everyone wants to improve their health. Most coffee drinkers do as well. And so that allows us to expand in this massive market without having to add a new product every single month just to hit our revenue targets. Step number 4 is to price for long-term profits. So once you start contacting suppliers, which you can easily find either through Google or Alibaba.com, you want to start deciding how do you want to position your product. And none of these options are necessarily 100% better than any of them, but you basically have 3 options. And there's another video where I've gone into more detail on pricing that you can find on my channel, but I'm going to give you the quick rundown right now. So there's 3 basic pricing options: discount, premium, or luxury. Each one of them has their own strategy. And so first, premium products, which is what most of us sell and is what I recommend to probably 8 out of 10 people, is go for a premium product. So you take something out there, for example, like we talked about, either subscription product or high margin one-time purchase product, and you see what everyone else is doing and you do something slightly better, at least for a segment of that market. Because you're improving that product, that allows you to sell at a slightly higher price. That slightly higher price you sell at gives you the margin to cover your costs because you're likely buying at a lower inventory quantity, so your pricing is not going to be good as everyone else you're competing with. But also with those excess profits per unit, because you're selling at a higher price, you reinvest that into marketing. So that's how a premium brand typically works. You don't do a ton of discounting, you kind of avoid it as much as possible, and you reinvest profits to build the brand and build awareness that your product actually exists. People see it everywhere and they're like, oh, it must be worth an extra 20, 30, 40% versus all these other options. Because you invest in marketing, you sell more units, that gives you more social proof, which reinforces this whole flywheel. So strategy number 1 is premium. Strategy number 2 is discount. So with a discount product, you sell at a price below what most other people sell at, or at least at the same price as the lowest price option. Advantage of this is people will beat down your door to get a good deal if they believe your product is high quality. Disadvantage is you have to buy really intelligently. You have to keep your product count very narrow at first. Otherwise, you're just going to burn cash buying inventory. And you also don't have as much money to reinvest in marketing because your margins are smaller, which means you have to be a lot scrappier on the marketing side. Advantages is that you get to put everything into the product and people love low prices. It makes it way easier to scale. It makes your market way bigger. And this strategy has worked for some brands like Comfort, for example, that sells their hoodies at not a very high price. But they sell it at such a mass volume because a lot of times they're selling them to younger people who don't have that much money. And so their business has absolutely exploded with that model. They don't try to be the best at everything, which is another part of the discount strategy, is you can't be the best in your product at everything. Think about like an Apple phone. They can include everything they could possibly think of because they're selling phones for $1,000. If they had to sell a phone for $100, they'd have to be much pickier about the features that they included and didn't include. So with a discount product, you can only be good at 1 or 2 things maximum. So you have to be very smart about choosing to be good at those things and mediocre at everything else from the product standpoint. And so that's the discount strategy. Third, which is the least common amongst earlier stage entrepreneurs, is luxury. Luxury is different than premium in that you're selling at a much higher price, you're doing basically zero discounting, and you're really paying attention to every single detail of the brand and its image, because that is what the whole thing is based on. The only reason people buy, multi-$1,000, tens of thousands of dollar purses is because those brands have reinforced through brand collaborations, through influencers, through celebrities, through how all their website design, their packaging design, where they advertise, fashion shows, all that reinforces that this product is a signal of your importance, your wealth, your beauty, all of that sort of stuff. And so all of that has to be reinforced over time. And as soon as you try to sell a cheaper product or you try to cut corners on some design work, the whole thing can fall apart. And so with a luxury business, you basically reinvest your extreme profits into reinforcing the brand image. And you're going to sell a fewer units. And so a lot of times what people do in this strategy, which is happening right now with Rolex watches on some cases, high-end Porsches, and they're basically limiting the quantity of those because they know that if they let it open to have everybody and their mom buy them, they're at some point are going to cap out on demand. So they're better off limiting the supply so they can sell each unit at an extremely high price. And then they use those excess profits to reinvest in the brand image, and that's how the flywheel works there. So when you're building your product, you want to decide which one of these strategies do you want to go with. 8 times out of 10, premium option is going to be the best, but discount and luxury are also available to you. Then step number 5 is you want to test small. You can do the best job picking a product, marketing it, all this kind of stuff, and the product can still flop. I've had a lot of product failures, and I try to do the best job I can on the front end, researching the product, branding it, pricing it, all those kind of things. But then the next thing you want to do is to limit your risk as much as possible. Whatever you can afford and whatever it takes to get a product that's at least 80% of the quality that you want, try to make that your maximum risk in terms of inventory and marketing. And so that allows you to, if the product doesn't work and you need to tweak it, you can order more inventory, you can adjust your marketing. If you have to completely scrap the product and launch something different, you also have the flexibility to do that. One rule of thumb here is A maximum product risk, if you have an existing business, should be no more than around 1% of your annual profits. If you do $2 million a year in annual profit, don't risk more than 20 grand on a new product. That's a good rule of thumb. Most of the time, you should be able to stick with it. Where we've made big mistakes is where we've gone way above that. We've had a business where it was only doing, say, $3 million a year in profit, but we spent $100,000+ to launch a single product. And then a lot of times those products end up flopping and we wasted 100 grand when we could have found the same answer out for 20 or 30 grand, and that would have been a lot smarter. And for that same budget, we could have made 3 different product tests as opposed to just risking everything on one. So limit your risk when you're launching any sort of new product. Step number 7, the final step, improve with every single reorder. I once met this Amazon seller who was doing $2 million a month just on Amazon, selling basically unbranded products that he owned. He didn't care about building a brand, but he was doing $2 million a month. I was like, this guy's doing something right. I was like, what's your secret? He's like, we basically improve our product with every single reorder. He was selling an umbrella that was kind of a no-name brand, but he made it with a manufacturer, and it got featured on some of the morning shows as the best umbrella. And all he did was every single time he reordered inventory, he improved something about the product. And that's stuck with me ever since. That's an incredibly important tip, is that every time you reorder product, improve the features, improve the functionality, improve the quality, improve the packaging, improve something. Because somebody is watching you and seeing the product that you sell today. They're looking at it, they're modeling it, they're trying to do something a little bit better themselves. And if you don't start improving your own product, they'll improve on it for you, except they'll start taking all of your sales. And so improve your product with every single reorder. And this goes on forever, for the life of your business. As you're reinvesting in marketing, you're doing all of the customer acquisition side, nurturing customers, but you're also improving the product every single time you go to order a new batch. And this is how you turn this business into a real $10 million company. Not just one that skyrockets up to $1 million a month and then falls over because somebody else takes over your sales. But this is how you build a business that's sustainable, which is how you really get that value, not just based on a sales number, but based on what that business can produce in the future. And so if you've built these processes of testing small and also improving the product with every single reorder, that's how you'll actually build a $10 million business in as little as 18 months.